one in front of you there, Shanice, you probably want to.
Press the button, hold it down. Yeah. There you go. Okay.
Here we go.
Oh, there you are.
Try not to.
So why is it so hard to achieve quality universal childcare? I think that that's a really big topic. It's not one. This one's kind of weird.
I could also just talk really loudly, but I'm not sure if anybody has this. Yeah.
So that's a really big question, and it's not one that's easy to talk about in just an hour. But one of the reasons is that childcare is an extremely political issue. So we see it often get a lot of uptake during elections, but how come nothing's ever done about it? And that's because a number of reasons. First of all is that, yes, childcare is a very debatable political topic. It's also requires substantial investment from our government, which then requires uptake from the public and a demand for accessible, affordable, high-quality childcare coming directly from Canadians. And I'm sure I'm missing.
I think if I had to pick the number one thing, I would probably say that it is due to the role of women in our society and how we conceptualize or think about caring for young children. So over time, the role of women has changed substantially, particularly in Canada. And more, women have taken on these dual roles of both mothering and also working, to the point where we are at today, where we basically have no choice but to work because our economy has changed and the cost of living has changed, and so now we see, okay, most families, if they have two parents, they're both working. But what we didn't do was deal with, okay, what happens when women leave the home to go to work, but they still have children? And we never dealt with that as a society, and we never made a choice to take up that work of taking care of young children collectively. So we have public health care, we have public education, but what we didn't deal with, and we still haven't dealt with, is public child care. That it's our collective responsibility to make sure that children have access to care and that their parents now can work because they need to work. Now it's gotten to the point where we are fighting the same battles that we were fighting in the 70s and the 80s, largely the women's movement and then the labor movement and so forth. We're fighting the same battles because now we're arguing about, can we afford it? Should children be in care? Is it bad for children? Women should be at home. We're having the same arguments over and over again, and really the reality of it is we need childcare and we need to pay for it collectively. That's the only way that it's going to be universally accessible and equitable and high quality. And so now it's a matter of proving that we can afford it and that it's worth it. And if you look back in history, it's pretty stunning how similar the arguments and the debates are, but it's going to take a big change in the way that we view care, in the way that we view the role of women, and also in the way that we view government and the role of government in our lives, and that we do actually support paying taxes, contributing to the collective, and having those public services that are universally accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and just to add, short answer. Just to add a little bit onto that is that, to break it down a little bit, is the government, and generally there's different political ideologies about what our responsibilities are as citizens of this country, right? And just working towards building the idea that childcare is a necessity for our country to grow economically, for it to grow and to create, a type of environment for people to come to this country. For example, if you're immigrating to this country, which a lot of majority of Canadians are all immigrants. I immigrated here in the early 90s, and how difficult it was for us to have childcare at that point. My parents were both working, and still it was not accessible. There was a language barrier. We didn't know any of the resources that were available to us to use at that time. And that disconnect, because of the lack of information and the lack of care that the government has for this issue, is definitely something that is holding us back from reaching, the optimal, universal, accessible, affordable childcare that everybody wants and everybody needs, because these kids are going to be the ones that are building our economy and our future. So investing in them, you would think, would be of highest priority. And I think that that's something that our field and advocates and people in government really need to push for, is why is it important to invest in the early years? And what is the return for that for the country itself, right?
Anyone had questions from the audience?
Yeah, we can go.
I know, it's really difficult to contain things into the 1 hour that we have. A lot of our students, particularly at this campus, are new Canadians. And so I'd be interested, just in a show of hands, how many of you with young children had a difficult time trying to find out the right processes to find subsidy in childcare centers? Show of hands. Yeah, so it's something that new families in Canada struggle with, is learning the system in a new government. Okay, we'll move on to our second point. Oh, sorry. Yes, Shelley?
I'm just saying, we say that, sorry, it's from the women movements, but the government is from a long time, from the World War, when women had to go into the workforce and even their kids. So what's taking them still so long to implement something in place for right now? Like, that's been so long ago, and we're still in 2015, and we're still in the next 5, 10 years more.
You're right. You can look at it and see that I can yell. Yeah. You can look at what you just said and say, back in the 60s, when women went into the workforce in large numbers, the government actually did provide universally accessible childcare. They were the first day nurseries in Canada, and that was the one and only time that Canada ever had universally accessible childcare. So that was in the 70s, and then you look at 2015, where 75% of working mothers are in the workforce. So where are their children when there's only about 20 to 25% of regulated spaces in Canada for children 0 to 12? So that's a very good question. I'm luckily not the government, so I can't tell you what they're doing. But if you look through history and you look at childcare and how the policies have developed to where they are now, the reason we haven't achieved childcare that everybody can access and afford is really because of a number of kind of intersecting realities, like political ideologies, changing of government, arguments from the right, from like conservative arguments that say women or a family member should stay home to care for a child, and children don't have kids if you can't afford them. Yeah, so there's a lot of, that's really a politically charged kind of argument, and so we need more people to understand that it is a politically charged argument, and to, join the childcare movement, especially as early childhood educators, as women, as parents. Your voice can be that determining factor that finally pushes the government to commit to growing a system that's funded by public dollars.
And of course, I said I wouldn't interrupt, and I have to. I just want to acknowledge that it's an important thing for the men in our programs too. Because as men in the programs, you're obviously choosing this because you value children and you value the role that you can play with them in terms of their development and their lifelong goals. And so you need to stand up for that voice as well, to say that this isn't just a luxury, this is something that our whole society needs to have figured out, so that we can move forward and stop having history repeat itself. Anything else that you wanted to add?
I just want to add to that. I think
Lindsay mentioned this when we were chatting before, that part of the issue is that we have grown childcare. Like, we have addressed to a point. We know we need childcare. There has been some growth in childcare over the years, acknowledging this need as women work or continue to work. But we've kind of maintained this mentality in Canada, and this goes back to the ideology that it's up to the family. It's their responsibility to take care of, to manage their childcare needs. So if a woman does choose to work, or parents choose to work, it's their responsibility to find somebody to care for their child while they do that, to pay for it. And so we've created a market-based system for childcare, and that's a big key in a lot of the problems that we might experience as ECEs in childcare. Lack of funding, inequitable access, low quality, comes from this mentality that it's a private responsibility, and therefore services should be provided through the private sector, you know, nonprofit, for-profit centers, and parents should purchase the service, as opposed to collectively funding the services and then being accessible at no or very low cost to all families. So it's really kind of a complex mixture of history, ideology, and then what we went forward and started doing, because now we have this sort of fragmented market-based system that is providing some great services but isn't working for the majority of families.
And it's not
And
equitable.
yeah. Yes, go ahead, Sue.
The thing is, you said that they're saying the family needs to take care of the children, right? I have a question. It's just like, you know, there are, if you're working with full time in certain places, they have coverages for you, like for your dentist, for your yada thing.
Like
Why can't
health
they have
benefits?
this thing, or like, you know, if you have a kid under whatever age, we'll give you some things for your children, daycare, like extended things like that. Why can't they have something instead of the universal? Why can't they have something like this to start up?
So the employer pays.
I know if they always have the universal, like, why can't they do like this to start up and see how it goes? How families really need a childcare? Because I'm pretty sure everybody wants to have a better childcare, right? And
They have done that.
assuming
They
that
have-
they have something like this that you have to pay a little to get something to pay. They will do it.
It's
But-
different from the subsidy system, is that what you're suggesting? It's different from subsidy.
Everything has been tried. Every way around a publicly funded universal system has been tried. That's the way we deal with childcare in Canada. We do everything but just create the public universal system that we need. We've tried all of those things. You know, the employer can provide the care.
Workplace
workplace childcare. Maybe the unions will provide the childcare. We've tried everything. We have, but unfortunately, it costs a lot of money, and what we see is that it's always at the bottom of the list, because it's something that we do. It has a long-term benefit. There's not a short-term gain necessarily, and it's a big picture thing that we have to do, that we have to say, okay, we're doing this not just because, we're going to invest in children and we're going to reap rewards later, but we're doing it because it's a fundamental, basic right for families to be able to work and be healthy and, access the services that they need, and it creates a more equitable society. And those kinds of more ambiguous long-term goals are very hard to kind of get people on board, including government, to kind of, invest in, right? So, because it costs a lot of money.
And it's not equal. Like you'll have a certain employer that will be able to offer this, and employer B will be able to offer this, and it doesn't work for person Z or person X. So it becomes very convoluted and complicated, and the access isn't there then.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to move to our next question. What does inclusive quality childcare really mean? What about home childcare, center-based, school-based, children with special needs, and Aboriginal children? How do they fit into a vision of quality childcare?
Well, currently, if any of you have experience working in the field, we know that children with special needs, especially children with severe special needs or disabilities, have a much harder time accessing regulated, center-based childcare. We also know that those children are also usually excluded from home-based childcare, just because, you know, you hear the provider say, we don't have the training to provide care for your child, and a whole list of things, right? So in our current system, a lot of children with special needs have less access, even less access than everybody else. In terms of childcare for Aboriginal populations, that's something that a universal system would address, because those populations in those areas are currently not receiving enough funding or support to make childcare programs work, but certainly they have all of the means necessary to do it. It's just the funding that's not there. Our vision of a universally accessible, high-quality childcare system absolutely needs to be 100% inclusive. I think that's definitely one of the big staples.
And just to add to, you know, looking at what inclusive settings mean now for ECEs, is I think everybody, as ECEs, our philosophy is that every child deserves the best start to life, regardless of their circumstance, where they come from, their abilities, or whatnot. However, as someone who was in the field for a while and just recently left the field, I know that inclusive settings are also really stressful and difficult for ECEs. The environment doesn't necessarily always allow you to have completely inclusive settings. You don't have enough staff to really be able to make it work so that you're having an emergent program. The child is getting the same equal opportunities as the other children. You know that there's a lot of extra care that needs to be given to these children. And with one ECE, one ECA, and let's say 18 children in the room, and you have 2 special needs kids, it becomes very complicated. And that's, I think, where the huge rip is that yes, we want to promote, we want to say we're inclusive. That is our major thing. No matter where you come from, no matter who you are, you have a right to affordable, accessible, universal childcare. But even currently, no matter how much we try, it's very fragmented. And a lot of the stress lays on the ECEs. In a lot of things, materials, environment, resources, planning, and just general development, right?
Yes.
Go ahead. Understanding that we're trying to get to the break the barriers and becoming universal, but what is it that actually prompts the system to actually go ahead with the inclusion before the funding?
That's a great question.
Well, we do some things already, like,
Yeah.
you know, we do acknowledge the need for, I mean, part of the problem is that inclusion costs money, again. It comes down to money. And when, like, going back to the market-based system where we're charging parents the fees, and those fees are the main source of money to keep this service going, it's a huge problem because those fees don't cover the true cost of care, and especially when we're trying to provide inclusive programs. So, but we do, the government, you know, has done something. So we do, for example, get, you know, special funding in various ways, and it's different across the provinces, special funding to include children, whether it pays for an extra staff or it pays for some extra materials that you need or some training. And so that's acknowledging that need for that extra support. And we also as a field, ECE as a field, the ECEs and the instructors, the professionals, they are the ones who have pushed inclusion. They are the ones who have pushed the field, even in dire straits, with so little material resources, to up our game and learn how to be inclusive, to get the training, to change our mentality, to educate the public, and to sacrifice a lot of personal resources, and like you said, like working really hard to promote and sustain inclusion in our programs, even against all odds. Even when we know, oh my God, I need 2 more staff, excuse me, oh my gosh. I need 2 more staff, I need some equipment, but we do it anyways. We include those children anyways. And so we are really the ones who are the experts and who know what needs to be done to facilitate inclusion. But what we need now is we need sustainable funding. That's why we need the system, because what the system creates is this sustainable funding that is not up to like, oh, is that child diagnosed or not? Oh, they're not, then you don't get any funding, right? It's things like that. We need to fund the program so that it's expected that it's inclusive. It's ready, it's willing, the program's set up that way. The doors are open. So that's why the system part is so important, because it facilitates all of those types of things, as opposed to now what we see as a case-by-case basis, where you have some centers that are doing everything right, and they are, just against all odds, including children in the most miraculous, amazing ways, meaningful ways. And then you have other centers who are literally turning kids away at the door and saying, no way, we can't afford you. Like that's what they're saying, right? And so it's just not working the way it is. But we do know, the research is there, we know exactly what's needed to include children meaningfully and to, support them. And we also know that including children is better for all children. Like we're focusing on children with disabilities. You mentioned quite a few groups, and there are some differences amongst those groups. But just for example, I can speak to the inclusion of children with disabilities. The research is so clear that actually high quality inclusive programs that include children at a proportional rate with disabilities are better programs for all children. They're better quality programs, period, across the board. And we know that. So now it's a matter of getting the financial resources and the policy and the commitment to make that possible for everyone. And it's better for ECEs too, because they're better work environments.
Well, it's also, like, to add to that, the ECE component is so important when we're talking about inclusion on a scale which Shanice's referring to. And one of the issues that we have with a market-based system is wages are low. So who are the ECs who are staying in the field, who are committed to inclusion and to providing high-quality programs and curriculum to all children and have a good grasp of that? A lot of those, great people can't financially afford to stay in the field, right? So that's another area that a sustainable funding, a real system would actually address, right? We need to talk about wages. If we're talking about inclusion and high quality programs, we gotta talk about wages and working conditions for early childhood educators. So that's where you guys.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
So we'll move on if there are no other questions. I just wanted to add for Olivia's question, in the early 80s, the government decided that the segregated programs for children with special needs would no longer receive funding, and that they needed to be, we at that time called it integrated. And I can remember getting a certificate of integration training. And so you went through that process to bring those children into what was considered mainstream. But again, it was without careful consideration of how much that was going to impact or cost. And so once the children were there, you can't just say, we'll go away. Your school is closed that you used to have. Now you would need to find a way to work within it. So the next question I had, and we're not going to spend too much time on this one because we're at 12 o'clock already, and I know these three women have a lot to say about my final question and hopefully about what the real purpose of today is to try and get you to think about. But my third question is, the ECE's seen a lot of growth in the last little while, and early childhood educators are now part of the general early education system, so JK and SK, and as many of you know, you've been in those field placements or are heading to those field placements. And it's been for a number of years now, 3 or 4 years, and I'm just wondering what the three guests that we have here today have noticed about how that relationship's going. What are we seeing in the larger community of Ontario, not just Toronto?
The relationship between the teacher, you mean?
Between the idea of the ECEs and the schools coming together, the teachers and the ECEs working as partners or not, as the case may be.
Can you just make sure everyone can hear us? Can you guys hear us?
Can you guys hear us?
I was just thinking, if we could use the mic from this point forward, just to make sure I'm getting good quality
sure.
for the...
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think we were actually talking about this earlier, and there's a word that you've probably heard 1,000 times in classes, which is seamless care, which is, as an ECE, how do you provide seamless care? Care between childcare, care between community, the family, the child, him or herself, and then school. And I think that there's a disconnect. And it's not a disconnect because the teachers don't care enough about the children or the ECEs are too busy to have these conversations. It's that this is a fairly new system of us collaborating and working together. And teachers coming to us and asking us about child development. You know, this is our opportunity. I think there's a lot of positive about this that we have to focus on rather than the negative, is that this is our opportunity to show that we are experts in child development. We have the capabilities, we have the language, we have the professionalism as ECEs to give them tips. You know, this child is having a difficult time sitting down. Well, maybe this child needs something to hold in their hand for this and that reason. Maybe the child needs to be seated next to this and that. There's resources that we can give to create a seamless care between school, daycare, family, community. And that's all, it just starts with conversation. And I think that instead of focusing on how difficult or how different it is, we need to focus on how much information we can provide, how much support, and how we can empower teachers to be experts in child development as well, and to make developmentally appropriate decisions.
I totally agree with what Victoria said. I have some experience working in full-day kindergarten. I was lucky enough to do a placement there my last year of university, and that was in 2010, the first fall that it was rolled out, so that was exciting. And I did feel very empowered because I knew way more than the kindergarten teacher did as a student. And I mean, personally, I do think that kindergarten teachers should be early childhood educators. And we're seeing more and more ECEs going to Teachers College to do just that. And I think that it's a good thing. I do think that full day kindergarten is a positive. I think a full day for children 4 and 5 is good for the education system. And I think the partnership between kindergarten teachers and ECEs is also very powerful. And it is important to look at it in a positive light, because sometimes I focus on the struggles and the issues with the program. And I think that Victoria hit the nail on the head to say that it's a positive thing that ECs are in the school system, but we do need to be cognizant of how that's affecting the larger workforce of early childhood educators. So now we're seeing FDK ECEs kind of here, and then we're also seeing ECEs who are working directly in childcare kind of over here. And I know Shani and I have had discussions recently about how to kind of bring them back together, and because we're still all trained in the same way.
Sure.
I'll leave it on the positive note.
Yeah.
Unless anybody has any questions.
Yeah. So you can always email us, guys. We're so open. If you have, want to continue a conversation with us.
I see 2 hands, so we'll go here first. Okay.
We just talk about money, economy, family, equal things, and the government thinks best things for the children development things, because the family never grow up like this. I have 2 boys, but I feel something missing. For example, every 10 years generation change, and then we can't catch this technology. After that, this is what I miss. When I put my son in the daycare, I can't feel sometimes comfortable, because many times maybe just 1 day 8 hours far away from him.
Right.
And then what kind of grow up with people 10 years later? How am I between my relationship with my son? What do you see?
So the pull that almost every family feels when they need to make a decision about putting their child in some kind of childcare because of financial reasons or attending college, and the wish and desire to be able to spend time with your child and the long-term effects of that. So that's where the research aspect comes into play greatly. Do you want to just briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I look at that is that it's not, childcare is not an issue that exists in isolation, which I think is often why it's sort of a little bit misunderstood or maybe bypassed, because it's pretty complex how a family manages their family, right? Work, life, childcare, extended family. I mean, I live with my mother, 2 sisters, partner, and daughter. You know what I mean? I'm managing a whole bunch of people and care roles there. But the thing is that it's not, childcare isn't going to solve a family's problems. It's not just childcare. We need to look at the big picture. What are the working conditions? What are the working hours? How much do you have to work to make how much money? This issue doesn't exist in isolation, but what we do know is that if families can't access childcare and they're forced out of work for that reason, the effects are very negative. And we also do know that good, high-quality childcare can be a huge support not only to children, but also to the family. Because that's, and I just have to say this about the FDK thing, that's what ECE and childcare has to offer that program, and that's not being utilized, is that it's not just education. It was supposed to be the integration of care and education. And when we're talking about care, we're talking about caring for those children as whole beings and their extended families and communities. And that's the specialization that ECEs bring. They bring that caring work that's intentional and that's meaningful and engaged in a way that's much more holistic than has typically been seen in, for example, half-day kindergarten. And we can't lose that. We can't lose that to try and live up to the education piece in FDK. We need to bring that in and change the education piece and then filter it down below kindergarten as well, because we still have to deal with 0 to 4 because they're not accessing full day programs that are universal and stuff. But I know I got sidetracked, I'm sorry.
No, I don't think you really did, because I think the answer that you're saying is that it depends on the quality. So if you're not feeling comfortable and you're not feeling that it's helpful and you're not feeling like it's letting you do what you need to do, that it might be the quality piece that needs to be addressed. And that's something we all know that Day Nurseries Act, or now Bill 10, looks at minimum standards. And minimum standards is like your C grade, you pass, but it doesn't mean you're excelling. Siva, did you have a question?
No, like we're at ECE, right? What do you feel when somebody calls you a babysitter? Because
Just one brief and non.
what it is,
We're not.
I know that I'm doing what I've been taught in school, right? So when I'm in a TDS replacement, I'm with a kid, but I've been told that teachers don't sit on the carpet with the children.
Prove
I'm
them wrong.
mingle with the children and get a good relationship with them, so I start with them and whatever. But I've been told that there are reports saying that teachers don't want to sit with the children because they're a teacher.
Right?
Prove them wrong. Yeah, prove them
Simple
wrong.
answer is prove them wrong. You know what research shows. You can bring in research materials and say, you know what, I'm gonna sit on the carpet and, hug my kids and do these things because this is what research has shown. And this is what I know, and this is true, and too bad.
Back it up.
Yeah, and professionalization, I'm,
diploma, but when she's marking.
You're right, and you're always going to have that problem as a student.
Yeah.
Students are always going to have that issue with the power dynamic between being a student, right?
I'm like, oh, but I see videos, but okay, sure. But the next day I do the same mistake because I cannot help because they just pull me, sit, and sometimes they push a person that they sit next to and come sit with me, and I cannot know. I'm a teacher, I should sit
Exactly. But that's what placements are for, right? You're learning your own philosophy. This is your
your opportunity. That experience is very important because you're learning where do you stand on this? What's your philosophy to teaching? What do you believe in? What are your values as an educator and as a caregiver? And eventually you're going to get into a position where you're not the student anymore, and you are going to have to stand up for those values. And you might have to be in a working environment where you're seeing a practice that you don't believe in. And you're going to have to find a way to communicate that, or to prove them wrong, or to defy it. And that's part of learning. That's what placements are for, right? Because we're encountering all kinds of practitioners in placement, we know, right? And so that's a beautiful learning experience for you to think about, okay, what do I do? Do I just follow the rules because she told me, well, teachers don't do this, because she's got some view of teachers that doesn't align with my view of myself as an educator and a caregiver, right? You gotta ask yourself that. And it's not easy.
Yeah, I do understand that.
Yeah.
Therefore, they go
Yeah.
over, because if they follow me, they will do the same thing to her. I understand that. But we don't babysit them. Don't do that. It's just some
Yeah. You want to just be.
babysitting.
You want to role model that what you're doing is care and education. You're working towards your diploma, and you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? And just be professional, be a role model, learn from the experience, and you'll draw on that experience years later.
Yeah.
Trust
And
me.
articulate
We've
why
all
you're
been
doing
there.
that.
Yeah, use professional language.
You're doing that to build a relationship, right? And look, go pull the new curriculum document from the Ministry of Education, the early years curriculum document. How does learning happen? Well, it's right there. That's going to become a mandated curriculum. It's right there. What is one of the pillars of it? Building relationships. You just entered a classroom. You're building relationships because you know the value of a secure attachment and what that means to a child when they need to learn. And all the resources are out there for you. What you need to do as a professional is find that and use that as a tool. That's your power. That's your knowledge, right? Seriously, because a lot of the time ECs don't have a lot of power. We have to take power. We have to build that power for ourselves. And if you don't, you're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to let Alyssa ask her question, and then we're going to do the last one.
So, a lot of us here are graduating this year. A lot of us are fourth semesters or even the ECs that are finishing their ECA program. What advice do you give us going into the field?
Okay, that's our next question. Perfect.
Oh, sorry. Looking out for you.
And I got my paper way over here. Okay, so this is the one that's probably going to get these ladies most excited about being here today. But I want to know from them and from you, how do we grow the childcare movement today and tomorrow to sort of fix the things that we were discussing about in the first three questions? So what do you see, how do you see childcare moving forward, and what role do we have or should we have in this process?
All right. Go down the line. So what role do early childhood educators play in the childcare movement? Well, I'll tell you right now that you play an enormous role. It's interesting because I'm pretty new to the childcare movement. I've been doing it for maybe 4 years now. But I started out exactly where you are as an early childhood educator. I'll always be an early childhood educator. And it's that value that you have for yourself and for the profession that's going to bring an enormous strength to the movement that the movement has never had before. My master's research focused on early childhood educators and advocacy and the differences between professionalism and being an advocate, because often we think of those things as contradictory. And we look at advocacy and we say, like, that's being real loud and in your face and going out and being aggressive, and being an early childhood educator is kind of different because we're professionals and we go to work, we're calm and we sing songs and we work with children and families, and we're pillars of our community. But what I actually found through my own research, we interviewed actors in the childcare movement, so some of their leaders, and we found that there is a huge gap where early childhood educators. This is really annoying me. I'm sorry. I just can't do it.
this is better. Okay. So there's actually a huge gap in the childcare movement where professionals are really needed. So I think that's a good starting place to kind of acknowledge that there is a space for early childhood educators in the field to be involved in what we call the advocacy movement and the movement for childcare, pushing for this system that we've been talking about, pushing for universally accessible childcare for all Canadians. And in doing that, you're actually advocating for yourselves and for the profession, because the workforce is you're the center of it. What determines high quality childcare? You guys do, right? And the movement's not gonna get anywhere if ECEs aren't on board and aren't pushing for the same thing. So that's kind of how I see it. And there are a lot of ways for you guys to get involved, but I'm gonna pass you over to these lovely ladies who head, Victoria works for the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare. Shani works at the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Ontario. So that's kind of where you would go to get involved. So pass it off to you guys.
I just want to say that I am probably the closest to you guys in the sense that I went to school at, it's so true, you guys have a master's. I went to school as a mature student, so I didn't go to to college until I was 25, and it was really difficult for me financially, but I really wanted to do it because I had worked in childcare for 4 years without being an EC, and there were a lot of things that really bothered me, and I saw a lot of the fragmentation and the difficulties, and I wanted to make a change in the community that I felt the most passionate about, which was childcare. And I went to George Brown, did everything that I needed to do, and I fell into advocacy because of a lot of different reasons, but during my placements, like you, I saw things that I didn't agree with. I saw things that I knew weren't developmentally appropriate, that I knew weren't right for the families. I saw these little tears and these little breaks, and I knew that I could fix them. I could do that better. And I knew 100 other people that could do that better. And then I would talk to these people. And it started with conversations. And the conversations led to conversations in class. And the conversations in class led to lectures and little peer groups that would meet for an hour after school. And then that led to other things. And it's a snowball effect. And we took that power and we made that change. And I worked in inner city. And I loved it. I worked with toddlers, preschoolers, kinders, school age, everything. And yes, it was challenging, and yes, it was difficult. But I went into this knowing that I have the power to empower families and to make a change in these communities. That's my job. That's part of my privilege, you know? And when you walk into any job with that mentality, you have the upper hand to make that change. And I'm not saying bulldoze in and be like, I know everything and change everything. But don't be afraid to have a voice and say, this is what's best for this community, these children in this program. That's your right, you're the expert, you know. And advocacy is an incredible way to unify you guys, your community, everything, in having a voice and having that freedom to talk about why childcare is important. The more that people push and the more that people talk, the more that you're involved, that's how change happens. Change doesn't happen by us waiting for the government to make better decisions. It's us pushing them to make better decisions. And it takes a long time and it's frustrating and it's hard. But so are a lot of other things that we know are really beneficial for children and we do them anyways. That's the mentality, is that you don't give up, you keep trying your best. That's all you can do, right? And coffee. Lots of coffee.
Oh man, these guys are so good. I don't even know what to say anymore. Well, I think I'm going to speak to kind of coming at it from the angle of where I'm working right now. And also something that Lindsay and I kind of developed together around ECEs and advocacy, which is this idea that actually in the long term, sometimes advocacy seems like extra work to people. And it is, to a point. But it actually benefits you in the long term immensely, because the amount that you learn just through the act of advocacy, just through being engaged in advocacy, makes you so much better at what you do. And not only that, it advances you in what you do, because you, with overnight, I mean, you wouldn't believe, you all of a sudden become a leader, right? You know what's going on. You know what changes are happening. You know why. You know what the root of the problem is. You can explain it to people, and all of a sudden people start to look to you as a leader. And not only your colleagues, but also people who might give you a job, right? People who might give you a recommendation to somebody for something that you really wanted to do, or maybe people who just might start to know your name, because there's not that many people that really kind of stick their head out, especially ECEs, and really kind of get involved and get active. But you are more than welcome to, and there's a space there for that to be done. But the thing I want to, beyond that, want to say is that one thing that I think we need to do as ECEs is we need to organize ourselves. And we need to come together and start advocating for ourselves. So we're really good at advocating for the children and families that we work with. We're really good at advocating for the programs that we work within. As Lindsay's mentioned, beyond that, some research has indicated that maybe ECs aren't so actively engaged at that sort of higher level advocacy, but I think that's changing. But we need to start advocating for ourselves, because that voice is missing. And it's going to continue to be ignored until we start to say, we are the main factor that contributes to quality care. You want inclusion, you want high quality, all of these things. You want us to implement this curriculum framework. You want us to work in partnership with teachers. You want us to be accountable to the College of Early Childhood Educators, right? That we need to be, who regulates us, right? We're held accountable to the public through our professional regulatory body. You want all of that from us? We need better working conditions. We need consistent pay. We need benefits. We need pensions. Whatever it is, we need the resources and the professional development to do our job, to do what you're asking us. And that movement is it's been going on for a long time, but in some ways it's just beginning again. It's coming back around. And through that uniting and through that movement, we can learn a whole lot about all of the things that we were talking about. Because the minute you start getting involved in that, all the answers come automatically, because they're the answers to all of the problems that you're facing. And so I guess what I would encourage you to do now, before you get out into the field, is to start looking around at what's out there. So your professor has so wonderfully invited us and these organizations to say, well, this is part of it. This is part of what's out there, but there's a whole lot else. And you can go to our websites, and that will kind of connect you. That will start the linkages to what else is out there. But you have to do it for yourselves. You have to start to share with each other. You have to start to say, okay, look, I found this great website. It's giving me all this information about what I need to know to go out into the field, what I need to know to do well in a job interview. Share that with your colleagues. Create an ECE group that's gonna, on Facebook, right? That's what the DECEs are doing in full day kindergarten. They're sharing resources, they're asking each other how to solve problems, where to get information, how to deal with the school board, da-da-da-da. Now, maybe, sometimes some things are a little bit unprofessional in those venues, but that we can choose to behave professionally anyways, right? But we have to start to do this for ourselves. And it inevitably pays off, both personally to manage some of the real challenges in the work, but it also is going to pay off in the long term when the voice of ECEs becomes louder, and all of a sudden things like the partnership between teachers and ECEs, that conversation, hey, guess what? It includes the voice of ECEs. Because up until this point, I'm a little bit more cynical than you guys. I don't think the voice of ECEs has been included or appreciated or asked for or brought in. And I'm saying all of this to then say there's an association, a professional association for early childhood educators. That's where I work. And it's a voluntary, you can become a member. It's a voluntary membership. You don't have to become a member. But what we've seen is that we don't typically have high membership over the years. And part of it is because there's a cost, and I understand that. But we need to start to find a venue, whether it's the AECO or another venue, to start coming together and organizing ourselves and having a collective voice and a collective identity. And the AECO is one step. So I encourage you to go to the website, check it out. There's a lot of information there, even if you don't become a member, that you can access. And just know that it exists. Know that it's there for you, and start to talk about it with your colleagues, and start to try and create change for yourselves, right? And also, it always looks good when you go into job interviews, when you know these names of places and organizations, hint, hint, wink, wink, right? Oh yeah, I know about that new thing that just got released by the government. Looks really, really good, right? You should anyways, but I'd like to give you some kind of incentive on that one. But the last thing I want to tell you about is this campaign. It's called Professional Pay for Professional Work. You don't need to be a member of the organization to engage in the campaign or to share the campaign. And I've got some handouts here that have a little bit of an intro to the idea behind this campaign and sort of the strategy towards it. And I really encourage you to look into it, because this is about raising, the power and the voice of ECEs and really starting to address the root of the problem, which is we do an amazing job. We're professionals. We know what needs to get done, but you can't keep us in the field if we're not experienced professional workplaces with all of the appropriate, qualities. And so I encourage you to look it up and to start thinking about it that way, and just don't let anybody tell you that you're not a professional or that you shouldn't sit on the floor when you know that you should, or
Okay, I have a feeling this woman could talk for
just a couple hours, maybe 2 or 3.
But we're at 12:28, and I don't want you to be late for your next class. I just want you to please show your appreciation for the time and the expertise that you shared with us. I will bring the handouts to our advocacy class. You all have lots to think about when you're starting to consider what your group project for advocacy will be.